Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started with our next presentation. Welcome again to the 2023 Sports Analytics Conference. I'm sure you've been welcomed so many times. My name is Tal. I'm a first-year MBA student at MIT Sloan, part of the organizing committee for this weekend. So excited to see you all here now, finally in person. And I'm incredibly excited to welcome you today to our Competitive Advantage Talk presented by Kager, also known as Craft Analytics Group. Our presentation today is Virtual Becomes Reality, the Tour de France Femmes avec Zwift. I'd especially love to welcome our speaker, Kate Verino, Director of Women's Strategy at Zwift. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Kate.
Thank you so much. All right, got my clicker. All right, thank you everyone for coming. Good afternoon. I'm excited to see my Whoop data after this. All right, any cyclists in the house? Just want to kind of see what kind of audience I'm speaking to here. Okay, great. I also speak basketball. That was my first love. And I now live in LA, which is really hard as a diehard Celtic fan. So, all right, let's get into this. So I love telling this story. This is a really fun story about the power of tech to break down barriers. All right, so let's get into it. Virtual becomes reality. So this past summer, something pretty incredible happened. The inaugural Tour de France Femmes avec Zwift. This is a long-awaited women's version of the iconic bike race. And as a very fascinating modern twist, Zwift, the fitness company born from gaming, was the catalyst to making it happen. So today we're going to dive into how the metaverse, the pandemic, and big bets all collided to make one giant leap towards parity. All right. Yellow. Yellow is sacred in the sport of cycling. Yellow is the color of the Tour de France winner's jersey, the highest honor in the sport. Yellow is more precious than Olympic gold or world champion rainbow, because the Tour de France stands on its own, high above all other races. It is by far and away the most prestigious in its audience and value. For 100 years, for 120 years, the world's greatest cyclists have been racing through the sunflowered fields of France, up the Alps and the Pyrenees, finishing in grand fashion on the Champs-Élysées in Paris. The Tour de France is often cited as the world's most watched annual sporting event. That's because it is broadcast on 100 channels in 190 countries with an average daily of 160 million. And that doesn't even count the 500,000 people that are lining the course every day. The eyeballs on this are insane. It's like one of the most valuable landscapes in sports. It's owned and operated, very heavily controlled. ASO is the Amori. Is there a little problem with my mic? Good? Okay. Owned and operated by ASO, the Amori Sport Organization. Oh, I can't see, sorry.
Can I just give you the handheld?
Oh, yeah, there we go.
Sorry. Thank you.
We can do it this way. Okay, oh yeah, I do want to hold on to that. Okay, so it's owned and operated and controlled by ASO, the Amori Sport Group, which is a division of the Amori Group, a very big sports and media company that owns L'Équipe, which is a French newspaper. So the Tour de France is unique, it's iconic, it's complicated, and traditionally men's only. There's this moment that every women pro cyclist knows all too well. I've had this moment. Somebody asks you, what do you do? And you're like, very proudly, I'm a pro cyclist. And they're like, oh, wow, that's so cool. Like Tour de France? And you just kind of stop and well, not quite. And it's kind of crushing, and it just kind of slams you back down into your place. Because in 120 years, there have only been 3 editions of this race that were sanctioned women's Tour de France. One in 1955, it lasted 1 year, gone. One in 1984 lasted 5 years. And a very fun fact, most people think that Greg LeMond is the first American to win the Tour de France and pull on that coveted yellow jersey. Nope, that was Marianne Martin in the 1984 race. In 2014, after a very public campaign by ex-pros and current pros, women, the race said, okay, fine, we'll do a one-stage race that's going to be official. It's called La Course. And it lasted 8 years, never expanded beyond 2 stages, always felt like a sideshow to the main event. So without that broadcast, media support, or the confidence of long-term planning, there was no way that these early versions were going to succeed. Meanwhile, in California, startup Zwift emerges, and we're going to revolutionize indoor training. So the app uses massively multiplayer online gaming technology, read video game, to create a fun, immersive 3D world for cyclists and runners to train, ride, and race all together, all around the world. Essentially a cycling video game. So Zwift created a metaverse. So now with this metaverse, with this new world, comes new opportunities. So the app really took off and really grew in popularity, definitely leading in its space. And Zwift started to realize that they could do more than just cure indoor cycling boredom. They could address some of the other challenges facing cyclists. Challenges like having time to ride with busy families and busy careers. Challenges like dealing with traffic or Boston weather. Challenges like having access to community to ride with or races. So Zwift started to really think about the fact that we have this virtual world that can literally create the world of cycling that you want to be a part of. So that was going to be one that's inclusive, accessible, social, safe, fun, and it can also have volcanoes and dinosaurs. We also had a ton of performance data. So this is where it gets really fun. Zwift created a new pathway to the pros. In 2016, inspired by GT Academy, which is a virtual reality car driving competition by Nissan and PlayStation, Zwift created its own global cycling competition on the platform to win a pro contract. And they did it with a women's World Tour team, Canyon SRAM Racing, and they hired me to run it. So basically, you could try out from your living room, from your garage, try out for a pro team. We had 1,200 women sign up that first year. We were thrilled because we had like a goal of like 500, and it just kept ticking up, and it was so exciting. This past year, 7 years later, we had 160,000 participants in a program that's now expanded to both a men's and women's contract. It's insane. And these winners, the winners of the contract, have gone on to win major World Tour races. It's a legitimate pathway to the pros. So Zwift created a credible alternative arena and now became a major player in the sport, somebody that's rethinking how it's done. So with the confidence of the success of Zwift Academy, we started to think, what else can we do? What other opportunities can we create? How can we level the playing field? So when we started racing in Zwift, virtual racing, we did complete parity from the start. Equal opportunity, equal prize purse, equal distance, equal promotion, 100% across the board, equal opportunity. And Zwift racing kind of took off. So much to the extent that we have hosted a officially sanctioned UCI Esports World Champion since 2020. And then yesterday, I'm not sure if anybody heard the IOC announcement that there was going to be an Olympic virtual series this summer in Singapore in June, and Zwift will be the platform for the cycling competition. So we're inching closer to those rings. So then the pandemic hit, and we all know what happened with home fitness then. So with races and riding shut down, cyclists flocked to Zwift for community and competition. We saw tremendous growth. But the interesting thing when we look closer at that growth was that the women's community was growing faster than the men's community. And this data was reinforced by other positive trends we were seeing in the industry. That year, Strava also announced that women's activities increased by 25% compared to men's activities increasing by 10%. So women's cycling definitely picking up pace. And then the unthinkable happens. So right now, pro cycling is also just on pause. Our races are canceled. Even all the pros are riding inside. Cycling fans and cycling media are desperate for action. So ASO, the organizers of the tour, and Zwift put their heads together and said, we could do it in Zwift. Let's do a virtual Tour de France. We're going to invite all the world's best teams to do a 6-day exhibition race on the platform. We're going to globally broadcast it. Super exciting. We said, great, this is awesome. We're going to do it on Zwift by Zwift rules, which means, of course, equal opportunity. So we had, men's and women's races. It was a huge success, 10 broadcasters in 130 countries. You could watch this on Eurosport. And we had 8 million viewers over the 12 hours of live coverage. Really sensational. I mean, people watching people ride inside, like sweating in their living room. It's crazy. I was one that said like 6 years ago, I was like, nobody's going to watch anybody race indoors. They do. They really do. So the cool thing about this was that the women's racing was better. The guys kind of phoned it in. They were like, all right, my team's making me do this, and they just kind of showed up. The women saw this opportunity, to be on a world stage, world broadcast, cycling world paying attention because they got nothing else to do, and they brought it, and it was really exciting. And the shorter distances really suited the women's racing style, really punchy and unpredictable style, and the women's racing was phenomenal. It was more what people talked about. So the viewership numbers just being so successful, everybody talking about the women's racing, this planted a very important seed. This sparked the conversation with Zwift and ASO. What's it going to take to finally relaunch a proper women's Tour de France stage race? The action and the audience are ripe for prime time. This is the right partnership to make it happen. How do we do this? So we raised our hand. We said, we'll get behind this for 4 years. Title sponsor. If anybody knows the Tour de France, I could never imagine the Tour de France putting another brand in their name. But they were willing to do it, for the women's race. So we signed a 4-year contract to be the title sponsors of the Tour de France Femmes avec Zwift. And this race was going to launch in July of 2022 in grand fashion on the final day of the men's race in the heart of Paris. So the planets had aligned. We now had a committed sponsor, a captive audience, and thrilling competition. And now the race was thrust into the 21st century. And we announced the partnership with this full-page ad in the New York Times, which I absolutely love. And it's going to one day wallpaper a wall in my house. All right. So now it's time to activate on this campaign. Women's sports provide such an awesome opportunity for new approaches to sponsor and fan engagement. Ask my friends at Angel City. This is a really positive, inspiring space. And women's sports fans are hungry. They've been starved for content, they're very value-driven, and they're highly engaged. So we had a ton of fun with this campaign. We brought to life a very vivid, very animated campaign. We used our brand colors with a touch of yellow. And we pedestaled the athletes and really brought the audience together around this collective mission, around this historic moment. And our campaign revolved around a very simple call to action: watch the Femme. Because when we watch, women win. Watch the Femme to see these powerhouses break down barriers. Watch the Femme so little girls could grow up dreaming of racing the Tour de France. Watch the Femme to change sport. Watch the Femme because it's great sport. It was really fun. We activated on the ground, in the game. I showed up at bike races. I showed up at local bike races with caps. My friends in LA know that you didn't see me this past year without a cap on. Really proud of how we brought this to life and how we really put a big giant spotlight on the athletes because it was really all about building fans. We want them to connect with these incredible riders. And there's this quote here. Let's see if I can read it. Let's see how well my LASIK's working. Okay, this is Kasia Niewiadoma, this Polish rider. She actually got third in the race. I grew up in a small town in Poland, not knowing what cycling was, yet always associating bike racers with the Tour de France, thinking this is the only thing they did. I feel so honored to be able to tell my grandchildren one day I was part of the change, the revolution, the progression in women's cycling. This is really a moment, and we really wanted to put a giant light on these incredible women that have been doing this all along, but now they finally have the attention to do it. Oops. Okay. Can we play this video? Why isn't it playing? Oh, no. Okay. Oh, no. I guess that didn't work. Okay. All right. Well, that was a minute of the race. I'm sorry that didn't work. But the race was spectacular. It was so good. It was 8 stages of nonstop action, and it was just a ton of fun. They really brought their A game. The stakes were so high. The riders told me after that each stage felt like the hardest race they'd ever done, because that's how much it mattered. And the world watched. This was awesome. We had 550 pieces of PR coverage. You know, we had tweets by Billie Jean King and FLOTUS, Jill Biden, Emmanuel Macron, tons of non-endemic press, including like New York Times, Washington Post, CNN International. Everybody wanted to talk about this because this was that moment. There's these defining moments in women's sports, like the first Women's World Cup, when the WNBA launched, when Billie Jean King and those 8 tennis players took $1 to go pro. There's these moments where the glass ceiling comes shattering down, and now the sky's the limit. And this was our moment. It was truly incredible. I honestly teared up while standing in Paris that day, probably several times. So in a banner year for women's sports, this was really, really well received. And then we got the early reports of success. 100 million viewed hours worldwide in 190 countries. That's insane for women's cycling. In France alone, 2.25 million people watched every day, which was a 26% audience share, with a peak of 5 million on the final stage. That's a 45% audience share in France. That's nuts. That year, the French Open women's final, 25%. Just to give you a little, comparison. It was crazy. Everybody in Europe apparently was watching the race. We had to step up a little as Americans, by the way. All right, and then we saw just crushing numbers in Netherlands, Belgium, and Denmark. And then leading cycling media sites, like the biggest sites, reported more traffic during the women's tour than the men's Giro d'Italia, which is the number 2 race in the country. So now this is the number 2 race in the world. It was just nuts, and it was so exciting to see. This is a picture of Marianne Vos. She's the GOAT. She is the best cyclist of all time. And to see her pull on the yellow jersey, she was in the leader's jersey for part of the race. She's won everything in cycling, but she never got to pull on a yellow jersey. And to see the look in her eyes, and her eyes well up as she put on that yellow because of what that means, it was just incredible. So the Tour de France Femmes avec Zwift was definitely a pivotal moment for the sport of cycling. Visibility equals viability. We see this across all women's sports. The more we allow audiences to watch, the more we can build audiences and investments and sponsors. So the success of this race hinged on a lot of the same factors that propelled other women's sports into those record-breaking numbers these past couple years. And that's not just coverage, but quality coverage. Multiple cameras, motorbikes following the riders, those incredible helicopter shots, drones, whatever you need. The commentary as well, top-level commentary. Optimal timing. We launched this race on the heels of the men's race, leveraging those massive audiences. Wider audience. We love to talk about how women's sports have the opportunity to bring new fans to the game. And of course, these fabulous new heroes. So this partnership was definitely born out of our passion to elevate women's cycling. That's been a long-standing passion at Zwift. And we really want to be catalysts to spark more investment, more fans, more coverage, and ultimately, more women on bikes. It's a long play, but we're off to a great start. And my favorite line, the finish line is just the beginning. So, thank you. All right, I'd love to take some questions. Anybody watch the tour? All right. What we got here, Phil?
Thanks, Kate. That was great. I was curious, obviously, for your contract with the title sponsor, what might be done differently moving forward, having had the data point of this year? Obviously, the stage kind of arrangement was interesting with just all mountaintop finishes for the end. Traditionally, there's the ride into Paris right at the end. Just curious if there's any change in format that you anticipate. Also with like experimentation of new media world, right? Like consumption of, in America, you're not really going to have consumption of 8 straight days of 5-hour events, just kind of with our American attention spans. So I'm kind of curious if you had thoughts on either of those things.
Yeah, a couple things. Well, we're really excited. We signed a 4-year, actually, with an extension, a potential extension for 5. A couple of the sponsors only signed a 1-year deal. Now they have to go back to the drawing board with ASO, and they're going to charge them through the roof because ASO had benchmarked 12% audience share in France as an insane success, and it hit 26. So it definitely exceeded all expectations. Now we know the audience is there. As a title sponsor, we feel a little bit more leverage as well to tell them what we want to see in the future of the race. Okay, like we came to the table because we believed in it. They came to the table because we had our checkbook open, So now we do feel like we have a lot more skin in the game, that we can help evolve the future of the race. So we definitely are talking about how to expand the race, how to optimize the coverage. Each year I think we'll see evolutions. This year we've added a giant mountain, the Col de Tourmalet, which is one of those iconic Tour de France climbs. And then we also added a time trial, another iconic element of the tour. So we'll continue to do things like that each year. But it does take, I'm in there just pushing them. I'm just pushing them no, believe me, guys, this is going to work. This is going to work. Yes?
Well, thank you so much for being here. Big fan of Zwift and big fan of you. And I know, Zwift is one of the only fitness tech companies that has like a dedicated, women's strategy role. So I'm curious to get your take or advice on, how to convince our organizations to think more critically and be more intentional about women's strategy.
Great question. I made it up, Director of Women's Strategy. I totally made it up. I was like, guys, we need this. I started to recognize, just coming to the company, I came to run that first program, Zwift Academy, which started out as a women's program, which got me super connected to our women's audience and our women's community. And I started to recognize that there were different motivations. There were different behaviors on the platform. I saw an opportunity to do things a little bit differently to engage women and to attract women to the platform. So I think it's in that you can find in data. That is like all data. It's like, what are women doing differently? How are they responding to our communications differently? How are they behaving on the platform differently? What are the partnership opportunities that are so targeted at women? So, I have work for years. I need to build a much bigger team because there's so much great work to do. Also, as you saw, one of the fastest growing segments. So, just tons of opportunities. Actually, a pretty easy sell. And I got myself a promotion. Anyone else? Yes.
Hi, my name is Julie. I'm also a student at Sloan right now, and I just wanted to say thank you for coming to talk. This was really inspirational for me. My question is actually more about Zwift itself.
Cool.
So this idea of cycling, with a screen and a race, it wasn't invented by Zwift per se. I've seen this in other products, and yet you guys have been so successful. My roommate has one. I've been trying to get my dad to get one. So I guess my question is how did you do so well? What did you have that, Peloton didn't, or these other softwares that I can't even name didn't quite come up with?
That's like a softball question. I love this one. All right. I can also play softball. Community. We built a community from the start on the platform. and we invested in our community, and we found ways to bring people together on the platform socially. They could ride together, they could message each other, they could build a club on Zwift. So they could find their social motivation on Zwift, and we all know social motivation works so well in the world of sports. You know, I'm gonna do my ride tomorrow because Kelsey's doing it, and I said I was gonna show up. So yeah, so we really invested in the community, and then we also listened to the community. So especially in the early days, but still, our CEO will like directly respond to people on Facebook who ask him questions. And we're like, Eric, you can stop doing that now. But like, it's great. I mean, that's how close we feel. That's how much we trust our community to help us drive the platform in the right directions. And it's also never getting comfortable. We are constantly pushing the platform, constantly innovating, constantly looking at what, you know, when Peloton trips or falls really hard, you know, things like that. You know, just really just keeping a very, very close eye on our competitors, never getting comfortable, and always looking for ways to bigger and better, whether it be partnering with the Tour de France or the UCI, or, you know, seeing what teams are hot right now. Like, you know, we sponsored Legion as they were first coming up, which is a huge, exciting team in the U.S. So just always constantly looking forward. And also we live our brand. We ride it. We are highly engaged in our community. So it just keeps us really fresh and really hungry. And it's been a really fun company to work at. I'm going to hit 7 years this spring, and I love it. And I keep joking that, yeah, one of these days it's going to slow down. It's not going to slow down, and that's why they hire a lot of athletes.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have, or all the time we have time for. But thank you again for an amazing presentation.
Thank you all. And if anybody has any questions on Zwift, come find me, or the tour, or biking, or what bike to buy, or anything. I love cycling.